Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be working on a Lord of Afflictions. Now one issue with this box set is in order to get a Lord of Afflictions you have to get the Puskyle Blight Lord's box set, so I'm basically going to have one entire model completely not used. So that's kind of irritating. Thank you Games Workshop for that. I skipped ahead to the part where I already assembled and primed the entire model. I assembled up to the point where it gets in the way of painting. Now for this I'm not going to do undercoating of dark colors and then highlights and stuff. I'm just going to go straight to a white scar and dry brush all over the body and other places where I think I need some highlights, which is just going to really be the rotfly's body. And it looks pretty good in the end. The reason why we won't really do this all over most of the body is because only really the rotfly we're going to be able to see through to the foundation. The rest are going to be painted with such strong colors that it's not going to matter. Switching over to Nuln Oil, we will use this as a foundation color for adding depth and darkness onto the rotfly's body. It won't be that visible in the end, but it will be noticeable if I don't do this step. So this is going to add some more texture and depth to the arms, limbs, and shadowy areas. Okay, now I'm going to try something new. I'm going to take Liquitex Glazing Medium and Game Color Dead Flesh, it looks just about right, and a little bit of dishwashing liquid, and I'm going to try to make a wash. Now the idea is to be able to apply this on and mix it together and it'll create a good wash, and the dead flesh color is a pretty good color, a yellowish kind of thing, and the glazing medium will add some like strength to it so it's not too diluted so that it won't like be watery and just run everywhere. And the dishwashing liquid, just a little bit just on the tip of my brush, what that's going to do is going to make, it's going to somehow chemically change the wash, and it's going to flow into all the recesses, apart from making the model really clean. However, in the end, it didn't work out. It was a great wash, yes. It flowed into all the recesses, and you could clearly see every single raised detail easily. It really worked very well. But the color just really didn't work for the fly. The gray showed in too much. I wanted the gray to be basically covered up, or the gray dark pre-shades that we did. So I quickly grabbed some water, rinsed it off, and started over. Since the first attempt was way too thin, I then decided to just not make it into a wash. So I used the Liquitex glazing medium and just added the dead flesh in, and with a little bit of water, and make it just a basic paint. And then I coated the whole model in it. And then I did a second coat because it just wasn't good enough. It didn't look right. Which, in the end, undid all the dry brushing and the Nuln Oil wash I did before. Well, what can you do? I don't have precognition, so whatever. I still needed the dry brushing though, so what I did was I took the dead flesh and I mixed a little bit of white scar white with it. And then I just dry brushed this pure white version of dead flesh all over the body. And so what it did is it picked out all the details on the arms and such, and it looked pretty good, but needed some shadow. I then took BL10 green and watered it down just a little bit, and then I applied it all over the body to add shading and stuff and to make it look green or greenish, and it did good with the shading. Looking back, I probably should have mixed in a little bit of dishwasher soap to be able to make it flow better into the recesses. After another look over it again, it needs to be highlighted again, so once again I take the dead flesh and I dry brush over the skin. It's like the 4th or 5th time I've done that over the skin, but this time should be the last, maybe. And it looks pretty good. It picks out all the details on the body, tones down the green a bit in the open areas, and it adds a bit of texture to the body in the end. Now with Mornfang Brown, Agrax Earthshade, and XV88, what we're going to do is we're going to paint the chitten, or the armor, or the carapace of the rotfly. And first we start off with a base layer of Mornfang Brown all over the chitten and the wings themselves. And then with Agrax Earthshade we go over all the chitten and stuff. All on the edges and everywhere. We want it to get in and we want this to shade everywhere. We then go back with the Mornfang Brown and we highlight all the raised areas and non-shadow areas. We basically want to repaint everything except for the deepest areas. Now for the wings and the claws, and I'm going to use a different technique. Instead of just highlighting directly, what I'm going to do is, I'm not going to dry brush, but I'm going to make sure there's not that much paint on the brush, and I'm going to over brush. I'm going to put the paintbrush on the side, and I'm just going to run it over the edges and stuff. That way it gets to the raised areas. And I keep rubbing it as much as I want. If I barely touch it and rub it very little paint will be added. But if I rub a lot and a little more paint will be added and it'll cover more surface area. So overbrushing will be used for the wings and the claws to protect all the details and such and such. I then use more Agrax Earthshade and putting in more shading into this model. This is going to be a character model, so I'm going to go a bit all out. We highlight again with Mornfang Brown, but this time we got to make sure that it is diluted a bit so that the paint is very smooth, because we want smooth application. And we're going to highlight the edges or center masses of the body. We want to basically build up layers of shading. And then for a final highlight, we're going to do a 1-to-1 mix of Mornfang Brown and XV88. Now we're going to just highlight the edges, basically wherever there's like a crack or hole inside the chitten. We're going to paint the upper raised area, the area right above it. We're going to paint the edges of the chitten. And then for the claws and the wings, we're going to do an overbrush, make sure there's very little paint on the brush, not dry brushed. And then we just put the brush on the edge and we just lightly touch where we want to go, like just light grazing. And this will do all the details for the claws and for the wings. And this will be basically the final highlight for this armor. Now it is important to note that we have basically used very thin layers on this armor. And it's going to be touched a lot in the future or rubbed a little bit during future painting. So what we're going to do is we're going to preserve this chitten right now. We're going to take AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish and we're just going to varnish all the claws and all the chitten and the armor on the wings and stuff to make sure we don't accidentally rub it off or remove the paint job as we paint this thing. Now moving on, we're going to use Maggots Purple Contrast Paint and Technical Contrast Medium. Now what we're going to do with this is we're going to paint the bruises, or there are open sores all over the bug's body. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply the contrast purple first, and then we're going to quickly clean our brush, then take the contrast medium, and then we're going to place it on the outer rim of the purple and brush it out. Then we're going to use Bestigor Flesh and Fugan Orange. We're going to paint all the boils on the body. We're going to start with Bestigor Flesh as a foundation for all the boils that are on the body. After that, we're going to go back and we're going to use Fugan Orange over all the spots that we have with Bestigor. And then once that's done, we do another highlight with Bestigor Flesh on the raised areas of each sore. Now with Nagaroth Night and Xenos Purple, what we're going to, or Xerxes, this purple color, light purple color, we're going to use this and we're going to paint all the veins. Alright, we're going to start with Nagaroth Night as a base coat on all these veins that are throughout the body of the rotfly. And then we're going to go back and we're going to paint over the highlighted areas of the veins with the light colored purple. Using cadium flesh tone and rhinox flesh shade, we're going to paint all these scars that are on the body. Now, there seems to be these Nurgle circle rings scarred onto the flesh. So we're going to start with a base layer of cadium flesh tone. And once that's dry, we're going to go back with rhinox flesh shade over it. Moving on, we're going to use Dawnstone and then Nuln Oil, and we're going to paint the eyes. We're going to do a base layer of Dawnstone on the eyes. And then after that dries, we're going to use Nuln Oil. And then once that dries, we're going to go and do a highlight of Dawnstone again. We continue this process of adding Dawnstone and then Nuln Oil to build up layers and to add some more shading onto it. Add 2 or 3 times the whole process is good enough, but you can do more if you want to build up even more layers, and then you just dilute the Dawnstone and the Nuln Oil further and further for higher layers, or for more and more layers. Now, using Drakenhof Nightshade and Hoeth Blue, we're going to now work on the wings. Starting off with the Hoeth Blue, we paint over all the wings, on the top and the bottom side this. This is going to be our base coat. We will then take Lamian Medium and we're going to mix it with the Drakenhof Nightshade to make sure it's diluted. And then we're going to apply a pretty diluted, like 1-to-1 mixture all over the wings just to add a little bit of the shadow in it. We will then take Drakenhof Nightshade and Agrax Earthshade in a 1-to-1 mix, and then we're going to apply it on about 2/3 of the wings, not the edges. We essentially want it going from the edges of the wing being light to towards the chitten it being darker. And in the end it looks okay, but not as good as everything else. Moving on, we're going to take Steel Legion Drab, Baneblade Brown, Karax Stone, and Nuln Oil. And what we're going to do is we're going to paint the fur on the seat. So we're going to start from darkest to lightest. We're going to take Steel Legion Drab and use that as our base coat for all the fur that's under the seat. Once that dries, we're going to then take the Baneblade Brown and we're going to overbrush it onto the entirety of the fur, all the tips and throughout the body. Only the deepest recesses won't have the Baneblade Brown. We then take the Karax Stone for a light overbrushing over all the tips and edges, only the most southern tips of all the fur. And then we use Nuln Oil and we coat the whole thing in it. This will add all the depth and shading, and it will tie all the colors together even further. We're then going to take Doombull Brown and then Nuln Oil and we're going to paint the seat. We're going to start with the base layer of Doombull Brown. And then once that's done, we're going to take Nuln Oil and apply it on top. And then once that's done, we're going to do a highlight of Doombull Brown again on the leather, on the raised areas. I repeat the process one more time of doing it with Nuln Oil and then highlighting again with Doombull Brown because I wanted more shades of color and more of a better transition. You can do as many shades as you like, and you can even move on to a lighter color in the end, but I will just do one more layer. And then moving on, we're going to take Lead Belcher and Nuln Oil, and we're going to do these little metal bits around the seat, and we're also going to do the metal chains. We're going to start off with Lead Belcher all over, and then we're just going to do Nuln Oil on top, and then a simple highlight or dry brush if you want of Lead Belcher back on top again. And now with Steel Legion Drab, Baneblade Brown, and Agrax Earthshade, we're going to paint the little horn in the front. We're going to start with Steel Legion Drab as a base coat, then overbrush with Baneblade Brown. After we do that, we're going to take the Agrax Earthshade and paint it directly on the horn. Then we go back with Baneblade Brown and overbrush or just paint the edges of the horn, the ribs, or whatever it is. And now using Baneblade Brown, Carex Stone, and Contrast Skeleton Horde, we're going to paint the little stinger at the bottom. Now for some reason I don't have all the footage of this, but basically I've done as I've always done. I place the base coat, then the highlight, then the shade, and then the highlight again on it. And it basically makes, this color combination makes kind of a yellowish horn. And now with gulemon flesh and maggots purple, we're going to take this and we're going to paint all the guts and organs. I'm going to start off with gulemon flesh because it's a very strong contrast paint and lays down a thick layer. After that dries, we're going to go over it again with maggots purple and add the purplish gutty color into it. And with pallid witch flesh, skeleton horde contrast, and gulemon flesh, we're going to redo the wings because everything else looks so much better that the wings really just bring it down. So we're going to have to try to do this again. We're going to start off with coating the whole thing in 2 coats of pallid witch flesh, and this took a very long time. We then apply skeleton horde contrast onto the wings. Since this is a pretty light see-through color, it's really not that bad to apply a thick layer or a non-diluted layer. I added a little bit of water just to make it a little more runny though. And then with a 1-to-1 mix of skeleton horde and gulemon flesh, we then add it to the 1/3 of the wing that's closest to the chitten. We then take a little bit of Agrax Earthshade and then we're just going to apply these dots on the holes on the wings to apply like some sort of bruising or wound there. And overall it looks like paper wings. And now with Castellan Green and Lead Belcher, we're going to paint the Lord of Afflictions armor. Now we're going to add just a little bit of Castellan Green into the Lead Belcher to give it that green color, and then we're just going to paint most of the armor plates this green Lead Belcher color. It looks pretty good. However, I left some plates unpainted because I'm going to just take the pure Lead Belcher and I'm going to paint that to add some distinction between the plates and add a little more flavor to it. Then using Agrax Earthshade, I then put it all over all the metal pieces to add like an earthy brownish color and coat into it and to add extra depth. And then using Iron Breaker, we're going to do a light dry brush on all the metal pieces. We just want to get the edges. This is basically sort of like a highlight edge, but we're going to do it via dry brushing. So we don't want to get it all over the metal, we just want to barely use it. We don't want to make the same mistake we did with the Blight Kings. Now with some Vallejo Burnt Umber, we're going to turn this into a wash and we're going to apply it all over the metal. This will make the appearance of rust and wear and tear be all over it. It's as thick and as diluted as you want, and if it's too much you can just wet your brush and just wipe off the excess. It's easy to apply. We will then take Ryza Rust. We're going to add little dabs to our brush and then we're just going to tap certain areas where it looks like the metal has been eaten away. Less is more. Do this sparingly on small areas that there are some parts of the model that looks like the metal has been destroyed by rust. So just add this in for a little bit of flavor. Then with keyslav flesh and pallid witch flesh, we're going to paint his flesh. We're going to start with a base layer of keyslav flesh all throughout the flesh. Now I did paint the neck and head early on because it would be easier to do that now and then paint the metal around it. So I skipped ahead on that one part, but the rest, it's easier to paint the flesh on here. And then once that's done, we are then going to do a mix of 1-to-1 keyslav flesh and pallid witch flesh, and then we're just going to highlight all the skin areas. And now using a little watered down skeleton horde contrast, we're going to apply this all over the skin. I wanted a bit more color in it, so this will give it a good yellowing. And after you apply the skeleton contrast horde, I'm going to go back to the 1-to-1 keyslav and pallid witch flesh mix and highlight again. And the skin looks good now. And now with Mornfang Brown, Agrax Earthshade, and XV88, we're going to paint the cloth that's on the guy. Starting with a base coat of Mornfang Brown, we apply this all over the cloth. After the cloth is done, we then go and take the Agrax Earthshade and apply it on. After that is done, we're going to take the Mornfang Brown and highlight everything. We then go back and apply another layer of Agrax Earthshade onto the model, followed by another highlight of Mornfang Brown on the very raised areas or the rips and tears. And then finally, using a 1-to-1 mix of Mornfang Brown and XV88, we then apply a highlight onto the very edges and raised areas. Use this sparingly, but it's to pick out detail. And then using pure XV88, we then highlight the most raised areas. Using rhinox hide, we're just going to use this as a basic leather color and just paint the straps, foot straps, and such. No more detail is going to be added. It's just something to add in. And then using Abaddon black, we're going to use this and we're just going to paint the teeth of the rot fly. And now with pallid witch flesh, Karak stone, and Agrax Earthshade, we're going to paint some wood. We're going to start with a dry brush of pallid witch flesh all along the shaft of the trident. Then using Karak stone, we're actually going to paint the, the straps, the cloth, whichever, the handle on the cloth handle on the spear, trident. And then using Agrax Earthshade, we will paint the shaft of the spear and the totem pole. They're both wood shafts. And then we do a second coat of Agrax Earthshade on the wood again, and as well as the straps. Then using lead belcher, we're just going to paint the tiny little pieces of metal here and there on the totem pole as well as the spear. There's a bunch of little trinkets. Then we'll use Nuln oil to add some shadow onto it. And then we will dry brush some lead belchers back onto the metal pieces. Carefully, we don't want to get it on the wood. And now with Rise of Rust, we're going to apply bits and pieces here and there to the trident, and anywhere else where we think there might be some rust effects needed. using we use this oxide color, and then we're going to sprinkle it around on pieces on the trident wherever we see fit. We paint the horns on this totem in the same way we painted the horn on the chair or seat of the bug, except this time we're going to use Nuln oil instead of Agrax Earthshade. Moving on to the body itself now, we're going to do a light dry brushing of pallid witch flesh onto the flesh to pick out its details. Make sure not to hit the horns or anything else. And now using gulemon flesh, skeleton horde, and maggots purple, we're going to start painting the corpses that are trophies here. For the main body, we're going to start with a layer of skeleton horde contrast. And then we will use maggots purple to add some color to him. I quickly take some Mornfang brown just to apply it to these, I don't know what he's like, ties on the eyes that seal them shut. And I'm going to paint his little ribs in the same way I painted the horns, like I painted the horn on the front seat. And now with Bestigor flesh and Fugan orange, we're going to paint all the little boils on the bodies and corpses and such, the trophies that are on the totem pole and such. We will start with Bestigor flesh, then we will add Fugan orange, and then we will highlight again with Bestigor flesh, as we have always. And now with Rhinox Hide, Steel Legion Drab, Mephiston Red, Cadian Flesh Tone, Mornfang Brown, Lead Belcher, and Agrax Earthshade, we're going to paint the body that the guy's holding. Now I'm going to assume this is like an Empire Man or Cities of Sigmar Man, so I'm going to paint him as such. First a base coat of Cadian Flesh Tone, then Mephiston Red on some of the clothes. Then Steel Legion Drab on his shirt. We will then use Mornfang Brown for his leather shoes, and we will also use it for his hair. We will then use Rhinox Hide for his leather belt and some other leather straps. We will then use Lead Belcher for his leather gauntlet, vambrace, whatever, and the little bracelet that's on his other arm, and a few of the metal pieces. I forgot to get video of it, but I coated the whole body in Agrax Earthshade for shading. And then I proceeded to highlight every single part of the body again with the same colors I just did, and this is a way just to build highlights, starting with the flesh. And then using pallid witch flesh, there's a tentacle that's going from his arm through the body's head and out its mouth, and I'm going to paint that pallid witch flesh. Now with gulemon flesh and maggots purple, we're going to do what we did with the organs on the rodfly. We're going to start with gulemon flesh, and we're going to paint the tentacle this. And then we're going to go back and do maggots purple on the tentacle, as well as use the gulemon flesh to highlight sores all over the body. Moving on to the base, we made an impression on the putty when it was still soft with the bell, and we now flood that with super glue, and we're going to place the model on the indent. We will also attach the upper body and the totem to the model now. And now for the little nurglings, we're going to dry brush pallid witch flesh onto the bodies of the one riding the fly and the one in the back. We will then paint the little rot fly with the dead flesh color. And then we'll use the green wash we used earlier to paint that as well. We will then paint dead flesh onto the highlights of the little rot fly. We will use a simple gulemon flesh on the wings and the horns. Then, using Plague Bearer's contrast paint, we will paint the bodies of all the nurglings. And then, using Fugue and Orange, we're just going to place a drop of it into each of the eye sockets, as well as paint the eyes and the little stinger of the rotfly abaddon black. And then we're going to paint the boils bestigor flesh. We're not going to do any more, we're just going to add bestigor flesh. And now with AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish, we're going to varnish the entire model, which in the end was a mistake. And then with Warp Block Bronze and Balthazar Gold, we're going to paint all the brass that we want, the tip of the horn and the bell. We're going to start with Warp Block Bronze as a base, and then we will dry brush or paint Balthazar Gold onto all the edges. And then with Liquitex Gloss Varnish, we're going to take this and we're going to paint all the open organs, all the wet spots, and all the boils all throughout the model. This to give it the shine that we want. And then using Ushabiti Bone and Skeleton Horde Contrast, we're going to paint all the maggots spread throughout all the models. There's on the Rotfly, then there's on the Nurglings. Just start with Ushabiti Bone, and then just coat it with Skeleton Horde Contrast. If you want to go further, you can dry brush Ushabiti Bone onto the maggots, but I didn't bother with that extra step. It's just a small detail. And then with Maggots Purple, I'm going to go back and apply it onto the open sores on the body that he's holding, just for some extra color. And now with Nurgle's Rot and Blood for the Blood God, we're going to start applying this liberally everywhere where we want the details. We're going to add Nurgle's Rot to places where we want to look like infection or rot is coming from, and Blood for the Blood God on all, well, organs, blood, where blood would flow. Yeah, just as a nice detail. I also want the teeth and the mouth to be coated in Nurgle's Rot, because I figured it would be spewing out from its mouth. I made the base as I usually do, and as such I then just edged the edging of the base with Abaddon black, and then the model was done. It took forever though, goodness. And now for my final thoughts. This was a good project, but I do hate the fact that I have to basically have half a kit wasted if I want to build a Lord of Afflictions, so that's a jerk move from Games Workshop. However, I'm going to rate myself a 7 out of 10. Now, here's why. The model I painted extremely well. I was really proud of myself. The chitten on this model is really good. I was surprised at how well that turned out. The AK Interactive matte varnish, how it works, it really brings out, you can see the individual brush strokes, and I think that did a great effect with the chitten. It really stood out and it looked really good. So the armor of the rotfly is great. However, this is where, if it wasn't for you, if I didn't use the AK Interactive everywhere, I would be giving this a like 9 out of 10. Because what it did do is it also completely removed all the shine from all his armor or from other metal parts and such. And this is the only good varnish I have, so this is more of a fault of me not having more different varnishes that work well. Like I have the Liquitex matte and gloss, but they're trash. They really distort. The only reason I use the Liquitex gloss varnish is because the shine, it really doesn't matter if there's some milky stuff in the way. So I've acquired some new varnish after this project, simply because I don't want this to happen again, one that allowed the metal to show through. I picked up the Army Painter varnish that will allow metal to go through, so I look forward to testing that. The other thing that didn't go well is the wings. Like, I just couldn't seem to get a good... It just didn't look good. I mean, it looks better than the first attempt with this paper-like wings, but well. Apart from that, everything else is very well detailed. I like a lot of the stuff, but ultimately it is held back because of the varnish in the wrong places. Like, I would use multiple varnishes on this in different areas and I would brush it on. But the model looks good. And that's about it. And next week, I have absolutely no idea. I'm just going to randomly pick from a bunch of kits I have and see what's up that I haven't shown here. Because I have like 50 Plague Bearers, 3 Gardens of Nurgle. There's like a whole bunch of kits of other stuff of Nurgle that I've already shown. I have to build out my army, and so I'll figure out what I have. I still have the Glotkin. I have not painted that, but I want to really master my painting before I attempt that. So that's for another time. I'll see you then.